There we go. All right, so in English, right, there are only a small number of patterns or templates for sentences to follow, or really clauses to follow. And here we've got them, all right, kind of listed out in a way that focuses on, for example, like instead of having like subject complement, I went ahead and listed out like predicate nominative, predicate adjective and stuff. But what I wanted to do is take a look at this, particularly the active voice, right, and talk about these different components. Now, the S's that we see in every one of them, right? Obviously, the subject. We see our V, our verbs, right? And we've got our three types. We've got our intransitive, which keep the action with the subject. We see our transitive verbs, right? We've got three templates for those guys. They transmit or transfer or trans whatever, as long as we remember that transitive verbs do this, they transfer that action from the subject to an object, the direct object, right? And then we have our V sub Ls, they're our linking verbs, right? That link either a noun or adjective to the subject. Okay. All right. So that's pretty straightforward, right? We've got the S's for the subject and then the V's for the verbs. But what are these other things? Okay. Let's take a look here. Okay, so the DO that we saw in three of those patterns, right, and in every one of those V sub T transitive verb patterns, right, that's the direct object. Okay, and that is the thing upon which the action of the verb is performed. You know, John kicked the ball. John, the subject, kicked the transitive verb. Kicked what? The ball. That's the direct object. Okay, so that. Um, that object that receives the action like that. Okay, direct object, right? Okay. Now we also see, in addition to the DO, right, we see an IO. That IO is the indirect object. Okay. Now that's okay. This is it sounds strange. Like it doesn't seem like there's much of a distinction when I explain it, but um, if I like if I give you an example, okay, I, the subject, give the transitive verb. Now, what am I giving? I'm giving example, okay, but the example is given to you, right? Now, the important thing here is that in English, that indirect object has to come between the direct object and the verb. If I say, I give an example to you, you are no longer the indirect object. You are now the object of the preposition to. Okay. So direct object receives the action, right? Like example was the direct object of give because that's what was being given. I give an example, or I give you an example. I give what? Example. Okay. But where's that example going? It's going to you, right? And we see that you is happening between the direct object example and give, the transitive verb. Okay, we also see that there's an OC there, right there, right? The OC is a little different, and it's not something that we see a lot of, but it's what we call the object complement. Okay. Now, it is a kind of a positive modifier for the direct object. So, um, we elected Obama president. So the subject, elected transitive verb, elected who or what? Elected Obama, right? But president. Okay. So then president is the object complement. Now, object complements can also be adjectives. You make me proud, right? So you, subject, make, transitive verb, me, the direct object, and then proud, then object complement. Okay. All right. And then we see here we've got, with the V sub Ls, right, the linking verbs, we've got PNs and PAs. Now, the PN we can see is the predicate nominative, right? And that's what is joined to the subject. That's the noun that's joined to the subject by the linking verb, okay, whatever that linking verb is. And this can also be, right, if it's a PA, it's a predicate adjective. Okay. And we touched a bit on that there in the adjective video, but there's nothing more to say really than It's the adjective joined to the subject by the linking verb. So I am your teacher, okay, subject, linking verb, predicate nominative, or, I am pleased, subject, linking verb, predicate adjective, okay, because it's an adjective. Okay, now, so those are the active voice templates for English sentences. Okay, what about the ones here? Okay, well, the passive voice, it's pretty straightforward. The only type of verb that can go passive is the transitive verbs, right? And you'll see that there's, the three different templates for the transitive verbs, and then they have their corresponding templates here in the passive voice, right? So SV sub TDO, subject, transitive verb, direct object, becomes then SV sub TP, subject, transitive, passive verb, okay? The SV sub TIODO, right, the subject, transitive verb, indirect object, direct object, becomes then the subject, transitive, passive verb, retained object, okay? We'll see what that means here in a second. Um, I'll tell you, in truth, the retained object is just the direct object, right? It was the direct object in the active voice. It's now the retained object, okay? But we'll see the conversion for that here in a sec. And then the SV sub T DOOC, the subject, transitive verb, direct object, object complement, becomes then the SV sub TP ROC, the subject, transitive, passive verb, retained object complement. Okay, so it was an object complement. We went to passive voice. We just retained it. Okay, let's take a look at how that converts there. Okay, all right. So in that first model where you go from SV sub TDO to SV sub TP, all right, when you go from active to passive voice here, the subject becomes the object of that preposition, that may or may not be there, doesn't have to be. The transitive verb becomes passive, and then the direct object becomes the subject. So I gave an example becomes an example was given, and then, by me. Okay, unnecessary, right? The second model, right, you've got SV sub T IODO, right? When that becomes SV sub TPRO, we see it's a lot like the original, or the first one rather, not the original, but the first one, in that the subject becomes the object of that unnecessary prepositional phrase, right? And the verb becomes passive. But in this case, the indirect object becomes the subject rather than the direct object. So here we have the indirect object becoming the subject, and then the direct object just is kept where it is, kind of like it's the retained object. So I gave you an example becomes you were given an example by me, right? This final model, SV sub T DOOC, right, the object complement, right? When we move to the passive voice, the SV sub TP ROC, okay, again, this is more like the first one that we looked at here, the first one here on the screen. The subject, like always, becomes the object of that unnecessary prepositional phrase there at the end. The verb goes passive. The direct object becomes the subject, like in the first one. And here the object complement stays kind of where it's at there, and we just call that the retained object complement. So my students made me proud, always, right? Becomes rather, I was made proud by my students. Okay, and we can see the parsing for that. There we go. Okay. If you had trouble kind of seeing that in your head there. All right, and here are some other various models of not active to passive or anything like that, but just kind of in general, various problematic sentences that I've come across. For example, here, my mom made me clean my room, right? Versus my mom told me to clean my room. So in the first case, she's making something happen. What does she make happen? She's making me clean my room. However, in the second case, right, we have my mom, said something to me. What was it that she said? right? She told me, okay, indirect object me, to clean my room. So in that case, clean my room or to clean my room is the direct object. All right? This is a great one here. It is impossible to know for sure. Okay. Now, in that case, we've got, okay, what is impossible? Well, to know for sure is impossible, right? That's the actual subject. Okay. It then is what's called an expletive. Okay. So if you wanted to, isolate it like I did here, put an S over it, just like, treat it like that, that's fine. If you want to put an X over it to indicate that it's an expletive or something extra, that's fine too. Okay. All right. Let's see here. When I realized what I had done, I confessed everything. An awesome example of a dependent clause and a dependent clause. The first dependent clause is like a noun. The larger dependent clause is an adverb. Good times there. Okay. All right. There we go. Here's some good one too. Let's. Okay. He is as foolish and fragile as a donkey with osteogenesis imperfecta. This is one of the. This is what you get when you ask students for examples of sentences there, but ultimately we see here that model of he is as blank as whatever, right? So these ases kind of act in this way. The first one is a adverb, the second a subordinating conjunction. Okay, and again this goes back to the um, elliptical clause, right? What's missing here? As a donkey with osteogenesis imperfecta is foolish and fragile. Okay. We've got, a student like Jermaine would be a perfect candidate. So in this case, like isn't acting as a subordinating conjunction, as if I said, he, oh, actually, I do say that right here. I'll kind of, so we can see it. So that I could do well on the test, I studied like a beast studies, right? That's what's omitted, like a beast for hours. So in this case, like is a subordinating conjunction. However, in this other case, a student like Jermaine, it's a preposition. Okay, so we have to pay attention to what's being used. She is as happy as can be, right? We've got that there. Chris was recently elected president. There we go. We see that transmission or that conversion to passive voice. Okay. All right. So there we go. And I think, let's see. Oh, good. We've got some more here. Okay. All right. Let's look at this one. This was actually a challenge to the class. Inside the piggy bank are $10 in pennies and $50 in nickels, making it a virtual treasure trove for the day when we finally decide to crack it open. Right. So this was, again, this is a way to parse this. I think this is probably the most defensible way of parsing that. Okay, but we see in this case, we see the subject coming after the verb, right? Which is in defiance a little bit of what we expect, right? The subject comes first, right? We in English speakers, we rely on word order to give us meaning, to kind of tell us what the different nouns are doing in the sentences. And here we see that that's kind of switched. That happens, but it's important to understand that when it does happen, it's intentional. All right, so those were sentence templates and some examples here of generally problematic sentences. If you ever come across a sentence that it's tough to make sense of, and bring it by after school, we'll have a time of tearing it apart. All right, well, there we go.